This story begins in silence, the kind that settles over stone walls long before dawn, on May 2nd of 1568. Inside Lochleven Castle, a queen who once ruled a nation prepares to do something almost unthinkable. There are no armies gathering at the gates, no battle cries echoing across the water, no grand rescue waiting to storm the walls. Instead, there's stillness, careful planning, and the quiet understanding that one wrong move will end everything. Mary, Queen of Scots, stands at the edge of freedom, though nothing about her situation suggests that she could ever reach it. To understand how she arrived at this point, you have to look back at how far she had fallen. Mary was not simply a royal figure who lost favor. She was a queen by birth, crowned as an infant, raised in the sophistication of the French court, and returned to Scotland to rule a divided land, a hostile land. Her reign was marked by tension, by religious conflict, and by political maneuvering that left little room for error. Yet it was her personal choices, especially her controversial marriage to Earl of Bothwell that I covered only a few episodes ago, that ultimately turned powerful nobles completely against her. By the summer of 1567, Mary found herself surrounded by those very nobles, forced to surrender at the Battle of Carberry Hill. She was taken not to the palace, but to Lochleven Castle, a fortress set on an island, cut off by water that made an escape seem nearly impossible. This was not a temporary inconvenience, it was a calculated imprisonment. She was placed under constant watch, her movements restricted, her conversations monitored, and her identity slowly stripped down to something far less than a reigning monarch. Inside the castle, life became a routine of quiet control. Mary was housed in the Glasgow Tower, a structure designed as much for security as for comfort. Women slept in her chamber to ensure that she would not slip away unnoticed. Doors were locked. Keys were carefully guarded. Even the smallest details of her life were observed every day. It was a world where freedom was measured not in miles, but in inches. Then came the physical and emotional blows that would have broken many people entirely, not to mention a royal. Shortly after her imprisonment, Mary fell seriously ill under circumstances that raised suspicion among those around her. Whether it was poison or simply the strain of her situation, no one could say with certainty. What followed was even more devastating. She miscarried twins. They were children conceived during a marriage that had already cost her so much. The loss was swift, the aftermath handled with little ceremony, and the grief left largely unspoken. But the belief is that when she fell seriously ill, Mary had been poisoned. Only days later, while still recovering, Mary was forced to abdicate her throne. Imagine the weight of that moment. Here's a queen reduced to signing away her crown while still confined within the walls of the prison after just losing her babies. The throne passed to her infant son, James, leaving Mary with not only no power, but without the very identity she had carried since childhood. She was no longer the ruler of Scotland. She was a prisoner with a past, and that was about it. And yet, there was something remarkable that began to take shape. Because Mary did not collapse under the weight of it all. She observed, she listened, she adapted. The castle that was meant to contain her became a place she studied carefully, learning its rhythms, its vulnerabilities, and most importantly, the people within it. Among those people were George Douglas, a member of the household whose loyalty began to shift over time. Accounts from the period suggest that his feelings toward Mary grew complicated, perhaps even affectionate, whether driven by admiration, sympathy, or, controversially, something deeper. His connection to her became a quiet but crucial thread in the story that was unfolding. Mary understood something essential. Escaping would not come from force. She wouldn't be able to force her way out of the doors. But it would come from trust, from patience, and from waiting for the right moment. She began to build relationships carefully, turning those around her from watchers into potential allies. Every conversation, every glance, every small kindness became part of a larger plan. Of course, it didn't work immediately. Her first attempts to escape ended in failure. In one attempt, she had disguised herself as a laundress, slipping out of the castle in plain sight. For a brief moment, it seemed as though she might succeed. But recognition came at the worst possible time, and she was returned to captivity before she could reach safety. The lesson was clear: disguise alone was not enough, especially when you have bright red hair. Ask me how I know. Another attempt involved scaling the castle walls, a plan that required both precision and physical endurance. But during preparations, one of her companions was injured, bringing the attempt to an abrupt end. Again, the message was the same. Timing mattered. Conditions had to be perfect. There would be no room for improvisation. So Mary waited. And while she waited, something else was happening quietly in the background. A young relative of the household, Wiley Douglas, began to play a role that would prove essential. Unlike the guards or the nobles, he occupied a position that allowed him access without attracting the same level of suspicion. He was in many ways the perfect accomplice, not because he was powerful, but because he was overlooked. On the night that would change everything, the plan came together with a simplicity that made it almost invisible. There were no dramatic confrontations, no separate struggles. Wiley Douglas stole the keys. That was it. The barrier that had defined Mary's world for months was reduced to something that could be carried quietly in hand or in a pocket. Mary, dressed as a servant, blended into the very environment that had confined her. She did not run and she did not draw attention. She walked through corridors that had once felt like a maze, past doors that had always been closed. She moved with a calm that must have felt surreal given the stakes. Every step carried the risk of discovery, and yet nothing happened. There was no alarm, there was no interruption, and she reached the exit. And just like that, she was outside. A small boat waited to carry her across the waters of the Loch. The same waters that had made escape seem impossible now became part of her path to freedom. The crossing was quiet, deliberate, and final. Once on the far shore, George Douglas was waiting, along with 200 horsemen ready to escort the Queen away. In a matter of moments, the Queen, who had been so carefully contained, was gone. It's tempting to see this as a triumphant ending, a story where patience and intelligence overcame impossible odds, and in a big way it is. But history rarely offers such clean conclusions. And that's also the way it is here. Mary's escape did not restore her throne. It did not secure her safety in the long term. Within days, she would face new challenges, new conflicts, and ultimately a fate that would keep her entangled in the dangerous politics of her time. Still, there was something deeply compelling about this moment, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was so quiet. A queen did not fight her way out of this castle, out of captivity. Instead, she understood it. She worked within its limitations. She turned its structure, its people, its routines into the very tools that allowed her to leave it. It's a reminder that power is not always about strength. Sometimes it's about patience. Sometimes it's about knowing when to act and when to wait. Sometimes you have to go through an awful lot of pain while you're waiting, too. And sometimes it's about realizing that the most effective escape is the one no one sees coming until it's already over. I have a similar story of my own for those who know me well enough to hear it. So here's the question I want you to think about now, and I want your answer in the comments. If you had been in Mary's position, stripped of power, watched constantly, surrounded by uncertainty, would you have risked everything on a quiet, carefully planned escape, or would you have waited for someone else to come and save you? And of course, if you enjoy stories like this, make sure you follow the Facebook page for more deep dives into history's most fascinating moments and subscribe to the History Happens podcast so you never miss an episode.